Today I want to talk about advancing training, and we're going to do what I'm going to call the single boulder problem model, because I want to make a really clear distinction that there's kind of 4 ways that we can advance our training. Now, let's start with a single boulder problem, like an in-a-day max, pretty hard boulder problem for you. If we went from that single problem, there's kind of 4 directions that we can go. We may want to be able to do more boulder problems. We may want to be able to do harder boulder problems. We might want to be able to do longer boulder problems. Or we may want to be able to link a whole bunch of stuff together. And the way that we train is really specific to the adaptations that we're going to get. One of the problems that people address in training is the inability to complete a hard day of training, the inability to have a full day at the crag, or a real taper off at the end of like a scramble competition. This is likely a capacity issue. And so moving from our single boulder problem model, we really want to try to add more total boulders or more total climbing movement per session or per week of training. And this is a counterintuitive thing for a lot of people, but when we go to build capacity, the most important thing is to add more stuff. When I'm building my capacity session out, or if I'm trying to build that one thing, I'm only going to be keeping track of the total number of moves or total number of problems or whatever your metric is over the course of a training session or a training week. Now, I say training session or training week because you can keep your training sessions short, but add more sessions, or you can add more problems to those training sessions. So the first thing is to let go of all this trying to boulder at your limit. What we're going to just keep track of is doing more total problems. Let's look back on your training log, because I know you keep a training log, and make sure that we see how many problems you've been doing historically. If you've been doing 20 a session, 2 sessions a week for a total of 40, we're going to aim for 50 total problems. I'm going to try to see you and increase your total volume of bouldering by 10 to 20%. And then we're going to start adding harder and harder problems in very, very slowly. And so let's say your limit is V5. We're going to back off to doing V2s and V3s for a little while, but go to that 50 problem limit per week. And then we're going to slowly add in a couple more V3s, a couple V4s, and we're going to start increasing that intensity again. But we've seen this increase in total capacity, and then we bring the capacity up. And then once we are able to do 50 problems, again, at the level where we had started, up at those, doing some of those V5s, then we can do it again. We can reduce the intensity, go to 60 problems, and so on. And we really only have to increase that capacity to a functional level to where you see an improvement in what you're trying to improve. It's pretty simplistic, but it's a really important concept. I need to back off on intensity, increase volume, and then increase intensity. And that is how we start to increase capacity. This is specific climbing capacity, but it would also apply with our non-specific stuff. It would imply if we were training for a 5K run. So that is the intervention for the problem of not enough capacity. The second problem that we see is people that fail at the end of a long boulder problem, or they have a hard time transitioning from a season of training on the kilter board to going out and actually doing real boulders, or they fail on long sequences on routes. All of these things are indicative of the same problem, which is really an aerobic power issue. And we first address this by doing slightly longer durations on each of the boulders. The easy intervention here, and it's really, really simple, is to pull onto a boulder, hang out at the start holds for about 10 seconds once you've pulled up onto the wall, and then do the boulder problem. We have that 10 seconds of slight tension, a little bit of load on the fingers, and then we just do the normal boulder problem at the normal pace. This is really appropriate if you've got a moon board in your garage, or if you're at a climbing gym, you could do something where you do 2 or 3 moves and then link into a boulder problem. Now, we're trying to just slightly increase the amount of climbing that we're doing per set or per problem, rather than trying to do bigger sessions or harder problems or whatever. We're really just trying to pull out the duration of each individual thing. This would be similar to going from doing 5 pull-up sets to 7 pull-up sets. You really want to think about, like, I'm just pulling out very, very slightly. We want to try to make sure we're resting plenty between these things, and really we're asking for just a slight increase in aerobic power output. And yes, bouldering can be anaerobic, and yes, this is starting to go into this anaerobic or power endurance zone, but really the way that we're refueling this stuff is aerobically, and we want to get to this point that our body gets better and better and more efficient at this. I would do this by simply implementing 5 to 8 of these problems within a normal bouldering session. We don't need to get all crazy and go into like a short power endurance cycle or something like that. We just want to start asking our body to do things slightly differently. And if we can get into the habit of pulling that little bit of capacity out from maybe 30 seconds to 40 seconds, we start to adapt to what's really going on in the performance environment when we get out to the real boulders, where typically real outdoor boulder problems take longer than most of our indoor problems, and certainly more than our board problems. Problem number 3 is I just can't do harder bouldering. And this is what we all run up against, and this is what we all want to improve at. And how do people do harder bouldering? The simple answer is this: they try harder. And what's really fascinating about the elite and even the sub-elite climbers is that they tend to just try hard a little bit more than the rest of us do. When it comes to this intervention, we want to do slightly harder moves, but avoid going into that endurance zone. And one of the things that can happen to a lot of us is, as we're doing a normal board session or we're doing a normal bouldering session, is we go all the way out into 30 or 40 seconds of climbing, we get a little bit pumped and fatigued, and then we fail because of the fatigue rather than the actual hard moves. It feels like good training, but we're actually teaching ourselves to deal with fatigue rather than the technical skill of hard climbing. And so this third intervention is all about trying harder and harder moves and maybe letting go of the idea of sending problems. And so this is classic limit bouldering. You get into something really, really hard and try very, very hard at it. The next slightly easier level down that still addresses this system would be to do something like the 3 strikes bouldering workout. I learned this workout from my friend Chris Hampton years ago, and it's been super, super effective. You pick a pretty hard boulder problem, you give it 3 tries and try your hardest to send it in that session. You don't get a 4th go, you don't get to come back to it. And this is an excellent workout to do when you're traveling to a different climbing gym, or if you're over at a friend's house where you don't train very often. Get in there, give things 3 tries and try to send. These aren't technically as hard as limit boulders, but they are really, really important for progress because you are giving 3 super good efforts on these things. And effort starts to be this big key factor. So the third intervention, try hard stuff more often. The 4th thing is I lack the ability to do extended endurance or power endurance efforts. And this is the least common, and it's also the biggest trap. Power endurance training is this siren song because you get in there, you get super duper pumped, you feel the same way you feel the last time you failed on your problem or route, and you're like, this is exactly what I need to be doing. But failure of power endurance is usually a failure of technique, of skill, of tactics, or a lack of strength or aerobic endurance. And so all of those things need to be addressed before we really address these things. I look to increase someone's anaerobic or power endurance. One of the things I like to do is break a normal bouldering session into 10 session blocks. You're going to do 10 boulder problems and then take a big rest of 10 or 15 minutes, 10 more boulder problems, big rest of 10 or 15 minutes. And this is a good habit whether you're doing regular hard bouldering or if you're going to do this workout. Now, with this workout, we're going to maintain that same intensity of boulders. And I'm going to do 10 boulders in a row, and maybe I rest 3 or 4 or 5 minutes between normally. I'm going to set a clock to roll every 3 minutes. And we're going to do one problem every 3 minutes until I've done 10 problems or 30 minutes. Now, advanced climbers might do 3 to 5 rounds of this, big long session. Novice climbers maybe would do 2 or 3 rounds of this. And so it's going to be an hour and a half session. But I'm going to do one problem every 3 minutes, and I'm going to maintain intensity. So I'm going to do 10 problems, rest 10 or 15 minutes, 10 more problems, rest 10 or 15 minutes. And then the next time I come into the gym, I'm going to set that clock back a little bit. And I'm going to do one problem every 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Then I'm going to move back to one problem every 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And you're going to start to feel yourself having to deal with this fatigue, try to clear that fatigue before the next session. You've got to maintain the same grade, and you've got to try to maintain good movement and good skill while you're doing it. Now, the overall goal isn't to eventually get to where you can just link all 10 of these or something. The most important thing with any power endurance training is to see some small tick forward in our ability, and then we can move on to the next series of sessions. When I program power endurance, it's about 4 to 8 sessions of this stuff before we move back to focusing on strength and power and technique, or we move into focusing on longer endurance stuff. And like I said, it's the least common thing that I see as a weakness in climbers. So be careful if you decide that this is the path that you need to take. The 2 main keys to good training are showing up regularly and to address the things that are going to move us in the direction that we need to go. So if we can go back to our original boulder problem and we go, this is a super hard problem, I would like to do harder problems, I would like to be able to do more problems, I would like to be able to do longer problems, or I would like to just maintain the ability to do super, super hard levels of power endurance. We can do different types of workouts to move away from this problem. Now, we've got greater detail on the Climb Strong site. We've got greater detail on other videos on the YouTube channel, but it's really important that you understand that there's a lot of different ways to advance, and we need to advance in the right direction.